late 80s and early 90s. Russia is in a colossal economic crisis. The collapse of the country, global deficit, almost complete industrial production shutdown, job cuts, division of the country between criminal gangs, major strikes and rallies, the first interethnic conflicts. The euphoria of perestroika has been replaced by harsh reality. The authorities are less and less trusted by the citizens. Not only essential products are disappearing from the shelves, but also those products that have never been in short supply before: sugar, cereals, vegetable oil, and many others. Food cards or coupons were introduced for the first time after World War II. The reason for the emergence of the coupon system in the 90s was the shortage of consumer goods. Sausage, soap, tea, cereal, salt, sugar, bread, washing powder, women's underwear, tobacco products, vodka, and so on. Simply put, people had nothing to feed or clothe. Naturally, because all production stopped, practically nothing was produced or procured. The purpose of the introduction of coupons was to provide the population with a minimum guaranteed set of goods. Demand should have decreased, because without coupons, the goods were not sold. This is interesting. The coupon system for the least protected groups has long been in place in the United States. Grocery cards are a familiar tool of social support in America. Grocery coupon is an electronic card, monthly replenished by the state from budgetary funds. On average, each person received food stamps for $115 a month, and a family for $255 a month. In 2010, the number of Americans receiving food stamps grew to a record 42,900,000 people. Since 1988, privatization began in Russia. It took place after the adoption of the USSR law on the State Enterprise Association. At this stage, it was carried out in the absence of necessary regular framework. At the same time, its real scale remained unknown. Only in 1991 the development of privatization legislation began. By the law of the Russian Federation of July 3, 1991, on the state and municipal enterprise privatization in the Russian Federation, as amended on July 5, 1992. There were no documents before that. Privatization is a form of property transformation, which is a process of transferring state-municipal property into private hands. The main economic objective of privatization was to increase the efficiency of the economy by creating the institution of private ownership of the production means. The goal was more than good. Voucher privatization was carried out from 1992 since 1994. The government gives vouchers to the public, not for free. The price of each voucher was 25 rubles. Despite the fact that the nominal value of the voucher was 10,000 rubles, it was impossible to use it as a means of payment. The voucher gave the right to participate in privatization. Its actual value depended on the specific privatization situation at a particular enterprise. This is interesting. For example, in Moscow in 1994, one voucher could be exchanged for 50 shares of Gazprom Corporation, and in Nizhny Novgorod region 2,000 shares of Gazprom could be exchanged for the same voucher. Practically, privatization in Russia during the 90s was accompanied by exceptional levels of violence, corruption, and rampant crime. Plants and factories were bought up for next to nothing through personal connections and informal relationships with the top officials of the state and their relatives. There was a robbery of the population who understood nothing and were completely deceived. There was a time when all the oligarchs appeared. Where did they come from? Then the country was simply plundered. The labors of generation were appropriated by a few. As a result of privatization, a significant part of Russia's state property had passed into private hands. The first official millionaires and billionaires appear in the country with an unstable economy. Russian phenomenon. Russia is a country where the number of billionaires increases during the crisis, both in 90s and now. In the 90s, numerous cooperatives, LLCs, LTDs, joint ventures, and so on were actively created. Among those numerous firms, there was a moderately successful one with the abbreviation MMM. This was the case until 1994. After that, those three letters are permanently imprinted in the history of New Russia. In 1989, the structure of MMM was registered in the Lenin Executive Committee of Moscow as a cooperative and began its activities with trade and imported office equipment. At the head of the firm stood Sergei Mavrodi and two other co-founders. The law required a minimum of three people to open a cooperative. In fact, only he, Mavrodi, was in charge of all the business. I created a cooperative that was initially engaged in personal computer speculation. Well, like everyone was doing back then, it was the only business essentially. Personal computers were very popular among the people, so the company was doing well. The company could repeatedly provide people with free subway rides as a part of their commercial campaign. Check privatization came to an end. Cash privatization was ahead. During this transition period, MMM puts its shares on sale. The country was already divided among its power figures who had become oligarchs, so I wanted to intervene in this process. For this purpose, MMM was created and accumulated funds. The issue was limited with 991,000 shares, which sold out very quickly. There was a demand for the new ones, but Russian Federation's Ministry of Finance didn't allow to issue more. The scheme of constantly rising prices announced by the company was not supposed to stop. Mavrodi issued another 991,000 shares, but already in the company MMM funds, and sold them also. The firm did not make any difference between them. Sergei Mavrodi decided to circumvent the problem of the ban on issuing new shares by issuing so-called MMM tickets, which were not official securities and therefore were not burdened with restrictions. Moreover, these tickets were not covered by the Securities Act. In fact, they were beautiful pieces of paper that investors bought from the company, and the company in turn exchanged them from the investor. Considering their value increased by the means of independent quotations, these tickets had all the necessary degree of anti-counterfeiting protection. They were printed on the same machines as American dollars. Moreover, at first there was an idea not to invent a new design for the tickets, but simply to print the dollar in a red color, which was not prohibited by law, but later this was abandoned. The volume of MMM tickets was so large that it was necessary to stop the production of American currency, as the order from Russia was more profitable than the issue of dollars for the US Federal Reserve System. Thus, by the middle of 1994, in the peak of money privatization, MMM collected significant funds and could become the very strategic investor that the initiators of privatization spoke about. MMM was created for this purpose. It accumulated money and it could buy up the whole country on monetary privatization. That means I could buy up the whole country on monetary privatization and distribute it among MMM depositors. Then there would have been a real people's privatization. But the reformers had no new players in their plans. They counted on investments from large Western corporations and planned to give the plans to the director corps for nothing. Here they say there was no alternative. Yes, there was an alternative, MMM. From the moment they realized that the threat to their plans from Mavrodi's enterprise was more than real, MMM came under relentless attack from the government. This is interesting. According to the results of share sale auctions of Slavneft Oil and Gas Company LLC, the state received 48,800,000 US dollars. However, in reality, the price of the company shares amounted to 358,100,000 US dollars. Therefore, the state were underpaid by more than $309 million, and the lost profit of the federal budget amounted to about $220 million US. The central channels were now showing anti-MMM films. Officials of all ranks often spoke, explaining that MMM was a scam and urging people to take the money out of it immediately. There are the governor's reports of President Yeltsin in my criminal case on how the operation to break up MMM is going. Such statements undoubtedly provoke panic. In principle, if representatives of the authorities had announced from the screen to the whole country that, for example, Sberbank was a scam and that tomorrow it will burst, tomorrow it will definitely burst, in an attempt to save their saving, people immediately rushed to their deposits, which is logical. The only problem that no bank or financial institution has significant funds to pay off all depositors overnight. The result of such provoked panic is natural bankruptcy of the structure. By the way, such a scheme of banks' artificial bankruptcy is used to this day. But in the story of MMM, such a predictable result didn't work. Sergei Mavrodi, by his decree of July 29th, announced a decrease in the value of shares 127 times, again to the same 1,000 rubles from which everything started on February 1. At the same time, it was stated that the prices would now rise twice as fast, quadrupling every month. In fact, Mavrodi simply restarted the system, and this measure completely stabilized the situation, and huge queues to buy cheaper shares and tickets lined up in MMM again. On August 3, Mavrodi was invited to the White House for an extended government meeting specifically devoted to the MMM issue, which he did not attend, because I had no contact with the authorities in principle. Indeed, the situation was unacceptable, and at some stage the confrontation began. On August 4, 1994, Sergei Mavrodi was arrested in his apartment on Komsomolsky Prospect for tax evasion. This is interesting. The tax police ruled to recover 11 billion rubles from the firm in favor of the state in the form of taxes. 15 billion was paid to the treasury with a reserve. The tax authorities stated that the transfer was made from the wrong account, and thus MMM now has to pay 50 billion rubles with accumulated fines. Is it worth reminding that the amount paid before was not included in the calculation, it was never taken, and no one ever gave it back? The situation with Mavrodi's arrest was rather ambiguous. After he was taken into custody, all the media trumpeted that he was arrested on suspicion of fraud, especially since the authorities were not shy in their expressions and openly called him fraudster from all tribunes and TV screens, long before the trial and even the investigation. Meanwhile, Mavrodi was actually arrested only for tax evasion. It's very easy for me to talk about all these topics and argue what I'm saying because it's all in my criminal case file. This way, it turns out that the state officially recognized the MMM structure as legal, as only in this case they can collect taxes, which, by the way, as you remember, were paid even with a reserve. So, who has been deceiving people all the time? MMM? For 6 months of work, until the 4th of August 1994, the date of Mavrodi's arrest, prices rose 127 times, and the number of depositors of the company, according to various sources, reached from 10 to 15 million people. According to various estimates, in Moscow alone, Mavrodi was earning about $50 million a day. In 1994, then the funds were unlimited, rooms of money, and lived in the same apartment. It's not privatized. I bought absolutely nothing for myself. No palaces, no yachts, nothing. This is all, again, in my criminal case. Up until Mavrodi's arrest, MMM shares were freely bought and sold at the announced rate. Because of this, Mavrodi could not be accused of failing to fulfill his promises. The price of MMM shares was indeed rising. They really could be bought and sold at this price. Maybe the real deceivers were the authorities who saw a structure beyond their control as a real competitor in the division of state property and privatization. Prime Minister Chernomyrdin yelled at the security forces at every government meeting to do anything at all to him. It remains undeniable that representatives of the authorities disseminated knowingly false information about Mavrodi's allegedly fraudulent actions through the mass media. This information can be considered false because this fact was not established either in an investigative or judicial procedure, and the system was legal as taxes were collected from it. Moreover, after the arrest of MM's head, the fact of fraud was also not established during investigative and judicial actions. Whether the interest in MMM on the part of the authorities was a simple concern for the population is a rhetorical question. Why was it necessary to destroy the pyramid artificially if all TV screens trumped that it was about to collapse itself? To return money to people? So it was not done even after its collapse. All financial documentation and accounts of the company were seized by the state financial supervisory authorities. There are witnesses who claim that 70 trucks removed all the cash from the back door of the office. The 17 trucks that were removed from the central office. That's true. That was sounded on the trial. Again, it's not a fairy tale. It was heard in court. People confirmed it under oath. It was happening in the front of a 1,000-man crowd. Of course, the interest in MMM was not caused by the money seized during the inspection and subsequently mysteriously disappeared. Money in our country, as you know, tend to disappear without a trace. No one ever finds it. The real find was precisely the structure itself, the so-called pyramid, an instrument far more efficient than the ordinary printing press. It was its principle that the authorities used in building its own, already state-owned, pyramid of STGBs, short-term government bonds. The pyramid existed for several years, even though money was withdrawn from the system recklessly and uncontrollably. Such management of the system inevitably led to its collapse, plunging the country into a severe crisis and default in 1998. Thus, it turns out that a pyramid in the hands of an ordinary person is, as the authorities claim, a tool of a swindler, while in the hands of the state it's a boon for the people and almost a last hope. And people who only recently labeled scams left and right from screens and tribunes created the pyramid themselves. The policy of double standards. The state does not tolerate competition, not to mention the propaganda machine. Even after almost 20 years, there's hardly a person who would not have heard about MMM, but not many people know about a similar state pyramid scheme that led to a default of 1998. In 1998, Prime Minister Sergei declares a temporary cessation of STGB payments. This statement went unnoticed for the majority of Russians. It would seem why it should affect people if they have nothing to do with the state pyramid and have never even heard about it. Unfortunately, the consequences of STGB pyramid collapse were severe and almost led to a national catastrophe. The entire financial system of the country collapsed. The most important banks stopped functioning. The ruble exchange rate plummeted and prices skyrocketed. People lost all their savings once again. Bank accounts were blocked. The purchasing power of the population has sharply decreased. Thousands of small and medium-sized firms went bankrupt. Unemployment rose. Large enterprises suffered huge losses. So what did happen? It's simple. The STGB pyramid was built on a state scale, and it was not difficult to force Russians to participate in STGBs without their knowledge. The central bank created such conditions for the commercial banks that the only way to fulfill the central bank's requirements was to participate in STGBs. Banks that did not play were strangled by the prescriptions and simply closed or went bankrupt. The bank doesn't have any money of its own. 99% of the bank's money belongs to the depositors, not only personal, but also your company's money. It contains your future pension, your salary, and the salary of your colleagues, in general, all the money of Russians. The state also took care of the fact that enterprises could not keep their money in their own coffers, but had to deposit it in the bank. So the banks played STGBs with your money and you knew nothing about it. As a consequence, the banks collapse and your money disappears with them. So, what is a pyramid scheme? How to treat it? There are several well-established opinions on this. The first is that the pyramid produces nothing and it is not backed by anything, so it will collapse sooner or later. First of all, it's a myth that the rubble is backed by something. Can you go to the bank and exchange it for the precious metals? To begin with, banks, funds, insurance companies, and so on do not produce anything either. However, they exist and we use them every day without any fear. Moreover, in each of these structures, the principle of a pyramid is laid down. Banks receive your deposits at 1% and lend to another, but only at a higher rate. If you decide to withdraw your money, you will be paid at the expense of another depositor, as your money has already been lended, and so on in a circle. Doesn't that remind you of anything? The situation is the same with the pension fund, for example. The current pensions are paid out due to deductions to the pension fund of those who are working now. But pay attention that large financial corporations offer their pension funds to any citizens of the country, and here you can choose where to keep your pension savings. And with the general similarity in structure, there are also similarities in risks. If panic begins and a massive withdrawal of funds from the system by depositors happens, the structure will simply go bankrupt. And note that we are not talking about a pyramid scheme, but about so-called reliable banks and structures, and their size does not matter in this case. Second, pyramids don't live long. There are a lot of one-day pyramid schemes. This is a fact. But in this case, the matter is not in the structure itself, but in the dishonesty of the organizers. In fact, this also applies to any other organization. Banks, insurance companies, and even just stores can be the same one-day stores. They are not created to provide their direct services, but solely for the purpose of fraud, and their activities should be left to the law enforcement agencies. As for the longevity of the pyramid system without taking the above mentioned into account, it can live quite long, and ideally eternally. Examples of long-living pyramids, however, are quite numerous. Example 1 is the largest pyramid scheme to date, the American dollar. Okay, the dollar is a pyramid scheme, but they say there's an industry in the US, factories that back it up, and there is nothing behind your Mavro. Come on, what are you talking about? If dollar collapse, would the factories collapse as well? It's just a currency. These factories can be bought for euros and whatever you want with any other currency. Currently, gold-backed dollars are only 4% of the total mass. The remaining 96% is essential just paper, which is nevertheless recognized as valuable by everyone, freely circulating in the economy, and the data may already be out of date and the gap has become even larger. The printing press is constantly running, so the dollar is a pyramid scheme. This miserable 4% of real money won't be enough for everyone. The more US dollars printed, the less they are in principle. But this does not happen. In the 2008 crisis, the dollar collapsed. The entire world economy almost collapsed. Think about the scale of the dollar pyramid, but the pyramid is still supported at the state level and dollars continued to be printed and printed. The second example is smaller but also very impressive, the pyramid of the American financier Bernard Madoff. In fact, Madoff's example shows that it existed for 40 years and would probably have continued to exist if it hadn't been for the crisis. But during the crisis, pardon me, all the banks collapsed. The crisis affected everything. All the banks, all the investment funds suffered, and Madoff's business was also a little shaken. Some of his depositors decided to withdraw their deposits, quite large ones. Madoff could have resolved the situation very simply to withhold a little payment on deposits, referring to the crisis, and he would have been understood. These were quite ordinary measures for the time of crisis. Many banks and investment funds did so, especially since the depositors had no reason to distrust Madoff at this time. The firm was considered one of the leading market makers on the stock market. Madoff need not do anything of the above, and as a result, growing panic amongst depositors brought down his system. Third, the pyramid is limited to the population of the earth. The critics say the people on earth will run out. First of all, this very question means that no one doubts that it will come to the point where people on earth will run out due to the fact that there will be no possibility to attract new investors. The pyramid will collapse. And since the population of earth is limited, this is inevitable. Everything seems logical, except for the condition. Why is it considered that a person can participate only once? Why is it considered that the time of deposits in the system is the same for everyone? Because people don't do that. Imagine that you could buy only one pair of pants or any other thing in the whole life. You could only use it for a certain amount of time. Sounds silly. So why do such conditions apply to a pyramid scheme? After making a profit and making sure that the system is reliable, a person will come back again and again and with larger deposits. So this is a funnel pulling in the money. Where does the water go? Into a giant funnel, pulling in not water, but money. Here is sucked in, and where does it go? Again it goes into this funnel. This is a closed, continuous cycle. For general information, if you take any structure on the globe, it mostly forms a pyramid. Pyramids surround us on all sides. Pyramids are everywhere and everywhere. Let's take the simplest scheme, the highest level, the middle level, the lower level. Anything can be referred to the simplest scheme, the so-called pyramid of management, for example, the state structure of any country. But it is more difficult to get out of such a pyramid, and the participant is a human being. Pyramids of people at birth falling either into more prosperous, such as some European countries, or less prosperous, such as underdeveloped third world countries. The structure of any organization is the head of the company, supervisors and subordinates. Corruption pyramids. One gave to one, he gave to another, in turn, and etc. Financial, monetary, economic. If everything around us is a pyramid scheme, who can we trust? So, we can be deceived everywhere? It's just a pyramid on a pyramid, meaning you can only fight a pyramid with another pyramid. The main thing is not to panic. The most effective advice of economists in this case is to pay attention to economy. We introduced this term to mean that the money invested should be constantly monitored. Let's make such an analogy. Imagine that the money is your child. It's your own, and you, by great luck or fate, find an excellent vacation camp. Or you have a rather grown-up child and a trip abroad comes up, for example, for an exchange of experience for a couple of warm summer months. Organizers will assure you that your child will gain strength and health there, develop culturally and physically, that all conditions for this have been created. The question is whether you will not be interested in how the child feels away from you. I'm sure that you will start collecting information long before the departure. You will reread all the reviews on the internet, and you will study magazines and advertising brochures, and you will eventually call all your numerous relatives and get their opinion. It's the same with money. It's necessary to constantly monitor your fund's condition. How much the stated comfort conditions coincide with the actual conditions. If you see all the changes that happen to your money and analyze the environment around you, you can make money on any pyramid scheme. Absolutely any pyramid scheme. That's a fact. Be attentive to your money. Your capital will certainly grow and multiply under your care. We don't really need that much money. We need the consciousness that we have it.